These population forecast projections were prepared in 2018 based on the existing zoning at the time, existing land use plans, existing GLUP, and existing sector plans. And at the time, Arlington was projecting a population growth from around 238,000 in 2020 to over 300,000 people in 2045, a huge increase in population of about 65,000 people, again, based on the then existing zoning and land use plans. That's a lot to absorb. And as we move to the next slide, you can see some of the things that we needed to absorb to deal with this. The increase in population that I just referred to of roughly 63,000 in Arlington based on existing zoning and land use plans at the time is equivalent to the entire current populations of the municipalities of Culpeper and Charlottesville. Those two municipalities together today have 20 public schools, 29 parks, 4 libraries, 4 police stations, many bus routes and other transit systems and infrastructure. And so Arlington basically was planning at the time it did that forecast to have to accommodate and locate the infrastructure noted on this slide somewhere in Arlington. But unfortunately, Arlington hasn't developed the plans as to where this infrastructure is going to go, these public facilities. And that is before anything in the way of missing middle new zoning, increased density since these forecasts were prepared, and other changes that have brought additional density to Arlington since then. Let's move to the next slide. This is a serious problem because even before COVID, Arlington's budget outlook was grim. Our expenses are growing faster than our revenues. Arlington's last multi-year forecast prepared before COVID showed an operating deficit increasing in the out years. At the moment, as an example of a major proposed change in Arlington, we have the Plan Lee Highway process, which has been ongoing for several months in the Lee Highway corridor. At the moment, the Plan Lee Highway process assumes major density increases under 2 scenarios, which they call Scenario A and Scenario B, both of which, if implemented, would involve enormous increases in density, which are not accounted for in the population growth forecasts I mentioned. The current plan on Lee Highway is essentially to do something along the lines of Scenario A, but with, quote, elements of Scenario B, and also to introduce missing middle housing along the corridor at currently unspecified locations, but very likely in single-family zoning areas that are adjacent to the corridor on the south and north sides. This is the case, and when you consider the entire Lee Highway corridor, the impact is similar to adding yet another small town on top of the infrastructure that we noted earlier in the presentation, which the county has yet to figure out where to put. Let's move to the next slide. As I mentioned, both along the Lee Highway corridor and somewhere else in the county, which the county has yet to specify, the county is contemplating and seriously proposing the introduction of what it calls missing middle housing. In the years preceding the fall of 2020, the county was hinting and saying, and county leaders were saying, and some of them are still saying, that missing middle housing is designed to provide affordable housing. That is not true. The county has acknowledged, and it did so when it kicked off in September 2020, that what it calls missing middle housing is not going to be affordable housing, as that term is normally understood by regular, ordinary people. Instead, it's going to be very high-end housing, expensive housing, and not housing that is available to people in a lower and middle income categories. In addition, in the county already, 50% of the homes outside the metro corridor are already meet the definition of missing middle housing, so they're not missing. And the county has failed to explain why it is that it is making so much of an effort to add housing types that really are not missing in many parts of the county, rather than doing something that would help people in lower income categories. The county is now advocating for housing types as if they were in need of rights and civil rights protections. And ASF does not see the reason why that should be done, particularly when in many cases we're losing truly comparatively affordable housing to make way for more expensive housing. Our goal is a completely objective study of the costs and benefits of missing middle housing before any effort is made to upzone. Let's move to the next slide. As I mentioned, there's already plenty of marketplace evidence to show that the idea of creating so-called missing middle housing will not produce affordable housing. Here we see an image of two duplexes built on a property in Arlington on Dinwiddie Street, which previously contained a single-family house. Each of these two duplex units sold for $1.1 million. The county claims that it's necessary to add this new kind of housing because the supply will damp down prices. And that's simply not the case. The county has been adding almost 3,000 units of housing per year for the last 18, 20 years, and prices have continuously been going up. The introduction of missing middle housing will simply inflate land prices, and it will increasingly price out of that market the kinds of people that the county has said it is looking to help: African Americans, lower income people of other ethnic origins. It is not the answer to affordable housing. It's housing that will cater to law firm associates and junior executives at Amazon, but not something that the county should be in the business of incentivizing. Let's move to the next slide.
Peggy, please mute your phone.
There are all kinds of other severe infrastructure implications to the introduction of additional housing in Arlington, whether it's missing middle or otherwise. New development adds impervious surfaces. It requires even further measures to control against stormwater damage. In 2019, the county manager proposed offering some parks and community centers for new schools because of the failure I previously mentioned to have a master plan for public facilities, so we would know where these would be needed for the 60,000 plus people coming here before upzoning and before initiatives like Plan Lee Highway. We've had instances of contamination of our fresh water systems in various areas of the county, including recently in Halls Hill. And Arlington basically lacks the infrastructure needed for our current population, certainly for the extra 60,000, and for certainly sure for these additional tens of thousands of people that would be enabled by initiatives like the Lee Highway Corridor 1 and missing middle generally throughout the county. Let's move to the next slide. Our ecosystems in Arlington are under pressure. We've got already about approximately 45% of the surface of Arlington covered by impervious surfaces. We're adding a footprint, the equivalent of the Pentagon, footprint every 3 to 4 years. We're losing mature tree canopy in parts of Arlington, which can't be quickly replaced by little saplings. And we're suffering more damage as a result of climate change and runoff that's due to development, which is something we can control, even though climate change is only something that the municipality must do things to guard against. So let's move to the next slide. Another serious problem with upzoning, whether it's along the Lee Highway corridor or anywhere else in Arlington, is that because of the legal system in place in Arlington, essentially upzoning is forever. If we try this out as an experiment for 3 or 4 years and suddenly decide we've made a mistake, there's no turning back, because under our legal system, we have entitled the owner of the property to rely on the potentially increased incremental value of the property that might be conferred by upzoning. And that owner, if there was an attempt at downzone after the experiment failed, would successfully be able to recover money damages from the county if it tried to do that. So before we really look at upzoning, we need to take some specific steps. And let's turn to our final slide and we'll explain what those are. These are the things, this is the horse before the cart as far as ASF is concerned. And these are the studies that we think need to be prepared and provided to all of us before any specific proposals are considered or voted on regarding upzoning or the kinds of modifications that are being considered along Lee Highway. We want to see site-specific fiscal impact analyses for large new multi-unit residential projects. We want the county to release all existing long-term operating budget forecasts. And then we want the county to prepare on a countywide basis 3 specific comparative forecasts comparing our current zoning and land use plans with what things would look like with upzoning or the kinds of changes that are contemplated along Lee Highway. We want to see a 10-year long-term operating budget with and without the land use changes contemplated by the missing middle study. We want to see an environmental impact analysis before and after those potential changes. And we want to see analyses of household income by quintiles showing projected disparities among various different household groups compared to the national average. And we also want to see these kinds of analyses performed in major areas that are now being considered for potential future upzoning, such as the entire Lee Highway corridor, which at the moment is pointing toward a glut change rather than a zoning change. But we know zoning changes will be right behind that because missing middle is an integral part of the Lee Highway process. The sponsors of it have said so. And so these kinds of forecasts also need to be done on a corridor-wide basis, at least, and maybe in some of the sub areas along Lee Highway, to enable people to understand what the costs might be, as well as the potential benefits. I'm looking forward to answering questions tonight, but we may not be able to get to all of your questions in the time we have. So if there are questions that we don't get to, please email us with those at the email address shown on the screen, or you can look at our website where there's plenty of additional information to follow up. I appreciate this opportunity to make this statement, and I'm now going to turn it back to our moderator, Bill Roos, to call on people for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. And so if anyone has a question, you again, go down to the reactions button down there at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you hit reactions and then raise your hand. So I'll be able to answer them in order. So first question, and again, please keep questions short so that we can get as many people as possible in. Okay, first hand up was from Audrey Clement. So you need to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, Peter, I have read your your slide deck, and I think it's excellent, but I do have a devil's advocate question. And that is, cannot the county argue that these densified lots will in fact absorb the anticipated increase in population of more than 60,000 people? Over.
Well, the county has been known to argue a lot of things. And certainly the county's forecast in 2018, with which I began my presentation, assumed that the existing zoning and land use pattern that was in effect at the time would be sufficient to absorb an additional 60,000 people. In other words, they assumed that development by right, according to that existing zoning, would occur. But what they didn't tell us was how are we going to finance the public infrastructure and take the steps necessary to address the adverse environmental impacts of all of those changes. So by green lighting the existing zoning that we had as of 2018, the county was saying that the existing land use could absorb those things, but it hasn't provided the other items I mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we've got Mike Cantwell. Mike?
Hey, Bill, thanks a lot. And Peter, excellent presentation, like always. Who benefits financially from upzoning neighborhoods? What is your take on that?
Well, existing owners of properties that have been upzoned conceivably could obtain a financial benefit, because upzoning their property potentially could make it more valuable to the subsequent owner who might want to build something on the property in the way of a duplex or a triplex, which would be able to sell for a combined value that would be greater than the value of the existing structure. So in that sense, they would benefit. The county as a whole, which is hungry always for additional revenue, would also financially benefit, because the higher assessed value of the property could translate into higher tax revenues for the county in that scenario. What we don't see, and the other group of people that would benefit are developers. The developers who potentially could take advantage of the rights to build a triplex, let's say, on a lot that is now zoned for single family only, would be able to create and profit from doing that and make more money than what they can make off of the single family home. Builders potentially can make more money out of that as well. So those are examples of some of the groups that could financially benefit.
How about certain nonprofits? Are they financially incentivized by pushing upzoning?
Conceivably, nonprofits that are in the affordable housing business could profit either directly or indirectly. That's a possibility as well. Why don't we move on to another question?
Okay, so Carl Gold.
Thank you. Excellent presentation, Peter. Well, in response to the last question or follow-up, so is this group that had a presentation last week, what is with affordable housing solutions? Are they being duped? Because they're pitching this, they're shilling for the county and pitching this as an affordable housing solution, when, as you say, it's been very clear that there's no guarantee at all there'll be affordable housing coming out of this. The other question I have is, I'm a lawyer, which is not surprising around here. Are there any standards that they have to meet factually or legally to go through with this, or can it be appealed? Because there's a total mismatch between their facts and where they're going. I mean,
So
total.
let's take them one at a time.
Yeah, sure.
The question of whether they're being duped. I think the people that are being duped are the people who believe the claims that upzoning will produce all this affordable housing. Personally, I am quite skeptical that the people at the Alliance for Housing Solutions really believe that this is going to be the case. And in fact, I've heard them try to justify what they're doing somewhat along the following lines. If you remember that example of those two duplexes on Dinwiddie Street that sold for 1.1 million apiece, I have heard representatives of AHS say, well, after all, 1.1 million is going to be more affordable than the 1.6 million single family house that would have otherwise been built there. And that's what they're falling back on in terms of affordability. And I will concede to them that mathematically 1.1 million is less than 1.6 million. But that really is not something that the government of our county should be doing to try to enable and accelerate when we have people who are really in a dire need of affordable housing and are losing it when their currently affordable garden apartments are raised and replaced by more expensive housing. So the idea that the Alliance for Housing Solutions and other proponents are reduced to saying that they're going to produce affordable housing because after all 1.1 million is cheaper than 1.6 million is to me an insult as a longtime resident of Arlington, and it's an intellectual insult. Now, in terms of your question about can there be a lawsuit, that's going to depend on the facts of the particular case. What our group would urge those of you who agree with the general message that we're sending is at the moment, this is a political process. And the more people that can write to the county board expressing their disdain, disbelief, and hostility to the intellectually dishonest reasoning that some of the proponents of upzoning are using, the more people that the county board hears from that you can tell that this is not a valid way to proceed, the better it will be in terms of the political process. So that's what we would urge you to do at the moment. I don't think we're really at the stage where we can see a successful lawsuit, but we're certainly at the stage where people with legal skills and talent can turn them to help our group and individually with your neighbors and friends to spread the word that this is not a valid thing to do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Sherlock.
Hi, thank you. I have a quick comment and a question that's related. My comment goes to a slide that we saw early in the presentation, and I just wanted to point out that the option A on that slide, you may have drawn it from the Plan Lee Highway materials, and so therefore I assume it's accurate it as to at least part of the corridor. But in my block, option A as depicted on your slide understates the amount of density and height that's being proposed, and we're at the far end of area 2 at Lee and Lexington.
Yeah, let's go back a second, Bill, down to, I think that's
there you
the
go.
one.
Yeah, and the point I wanted to make for anyone who's following along with Plan Lee Highway on this presentation is that option A depicted here, many parts of Lee Highway will be worse than this option A depicted here. That first row of houses behind the commercial establishments is shaded for many sections of Lee Highway, representing consolidation of lots going up to, I think, 4 stories and possibly 5 stories. But in my block, I'm in the house at the far end where I would be looking across the street at potentially a row of townhouses or other multifamily. And that depiction of option A right there doesn't show that possibility. And I wanted to point out that that what we see here in option A, oh, that'd be fine with me. But the option A that we see in the plans covering many parts of Lee Highway is much worse than this. Oh, and my question was, speaking of things that, well, I'm trying to figure out, well, what would I be okay with? Would I be okay with duplexes and triplexes across the street? And I wonder, does anyone know that whether Arlington County allows them to occupy more of the footprint than a single family home? Or would they have to go within the existing footprint?
That the answer to the last point, I think, would depend on a couple of things. One, it might require lot consolidation,
Okay.
or it might, it's conceivable that one or more lots which currently have only a single family on it could be subdivided and a duplex could be created without without upzoning. But otherwise, it would be, as you very eloquently and appropriately noted, in many of these cases in option A, it's going to be significantly worse than it looks in that depiction.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we have talked about doing the horse before the cart with respect to the Lee Highway corridor planning, which means preparing quantitatively the kinds of studies that we talked about on our last slide. And even though at the moment the Lee Highway process is leading toward a potential change in the general land use plan and is not an immediate upzoning of anything necessarily to accommodate that, we know from many past experiences that once the general land use plan is altered to envision the kinds of uses that option A or alternative A or alternative B envision, that it then becomes very difficult to argue in a subsequent zoning proceeding where the zoning change is designed to fit the GLUP. It's very difficult to argue, oh, well, that's inappropriate when the general land use plan itself has been adopted. And that's why this is the moment to demand a halt to the accelerated effort to change the GLUP until we get these impacts. And we need them on a countywide basis also, Royce, because it isn't only the Lee Highway corridor where we're seeing these increases in density and where we're going to see potential proposals to upzone. We're going to see them in other corridors. We're going to see them potentially outside of corridors. And so we need to see this picture holistically, both on the corridor and countywide.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bill, it's Michelle. If somebody put in the chat, it would be helpful if people who ask questions could state their name and their neighborhood. It would be helpful for us to understand where everybody is.
Also, it'd be nice if folks put in, which I just did for myself here, put in your full name there instead of just the phone number or first name, just so we know who everybody is and you all know who everybody is. So, okay, thank you. Next is Kathy. Kathy's iPhone. And so unmute yourself.
Unmute. Okay, thank you for taking the call. Thank you.
Sure.
Kathy Lash, calling about Lion Village. And well, really, I have a different question that I'm sorry if this has already been stated or it's off topic. The affordable housing that we have in Arlington, I was talking to Eric Gutschall once, and I was like, what is the deal with affordable housing? He said, no one in the county understands affordable housing. The funding is complicated. Nobody really knows. So that's just a whole thing that has to be like unraveled. And what I was told by someone in the affordable housing thing is like, when a building is rented, the taxes on that building, a commercial building, are based on the rental income that is, received. So if affordable housing cuts, the rental rates much lower, the taxes on that parcel are much lower than they would be if they were, I don't know, market rate or something like that. So there's just a lot of things that I find a little complicated, and also that I believe the land goes back to the developer or the housing corporation. I'm not really sure about this, but after the 30 years or the 40 years that the affordable housing is donated to the county or whatever, then it reverts back to the developer, and they just own the land. So I find the whole process a little weird, but that's my comment, and I appreciate you all digging into this. Thank you. Thanks.
All right, Kathy, thank you very much. It is so complicated that I won't try to address every issue that you mentioned, but let me just make a couple of comments about the position of our group, Arlingtonians for a Sustainable Future, vis-a-vis what we should be doing to enable people who can't afford to live in Arlington to live here, if we decide that we want to do that and we want to use public resources to do it. In general, without getting down into all the details that we don't have time for, the current system of providing affordable housing is one that depends heavily on incentivizing private developers and nonprofits in the housing business to build more buildings. It's a very building-oriented system of building housing. In general, and so the end result of that is it is a contributor to increased density, and increased density is a contributor to the demand on our infrastructure.
Right.
So we have a number of positions on our website regarding alternative ways to help people live here who can't afford it. And in general, we would rather see an expansion of the housing grant program, an expansion of rent vouchers, efforts to put money in the hands of the people that we decide as a community are deserving of a public subsidy to live here, rather than something that hyper incentivizes building and more. We're also in favor of something of land trusts and co-ops, which under some circumstances, if properly structured, provide an ability for the participants to share somewhat and gain some equity in the property, but don't have the same impact as building more and more multifamily units with a tiny number that are affordable. Why don't we move to another question?
So actually, I don't see any other questions at this point.
Well, do you mind if I follow
Yeah,
up?
let's go. Well, go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, so the other thing is we own a little apartment building, and our rents are basically the same as affordable housing rents. And when I talked to the county, I was like, how, where are those numbers? The apartments that are just for rent that are not, that serve that same missing middle. And she's like, well, we don't really have a study on that. So I think there are some, just some missing data, so anyway, that's just my thought.
There are instances of missing data, which is a problem. There are cases, as you referred to earlier, where properties will only be affordable for a period of years and then revert back to market rate status.
Yeah.
And that has its own set of issues. All the items that you mentioned are a concern, and you also talked a little bit about the valuation and assume that some of these buildings are valued based on the income stream from the rentals, and that is one way to value a building for assessment purposes. Another way are the comparable sales of similar buildings, and sometimes that can be used as a valuation method as well. But the income method depends also on the accuracy of the rental income stream that's reported for purposes of assessments. And if that is inadequate, then the assessment can be off. Let's put it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we do have some other questions came up. Charlie Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I'm wondering though that some of the negative outcomes that you forecasting, if there's upzoning, like loss of trees and crowded schools and pressure on the storm drainage, But a lot of those are already being exacerbated under single family zoning because of all the tear downs and McMansion building that's going on. Am I right?
You are right that that is a contributing factor, and that's occurring under existing zoning, and we don't really have that under control now. And so the concern that we have as a group is we don't have that under control. We're facing an additional 60,000 people moving here who are going to have to live somewhere and have a call on our services. And we don't have a plan for the environmental impact or the way we're going to finance the infrastructure for those people. And now in the wake of all of that, we're being told that a whole new wave of upzoning neighborhoods to enable so-called missing middle housing is on its way. And the Lee Highway Corridor process, whether it's alternative A or some modification of it, is also coming. And we don't have the studies impacting that either. So what we're saying, as I mentioned before, of the horse before the cart, let's get those studies done. First, with respect to the issues that you mentioned, Charlie, the adverse impacts of existing zoning on the environment and our fiscal policy, and then on these other items.
Thank you. I forgot to mention that I live in the East Falls Church neighborhood. So.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Daniel.
Yeah, hi. My name is Daniel Caracamolito. Sorry I didn't include my last name in the entry. I couldn't figure out how to change it. I am in the Overly Knolls neighborhood, pretty close to East Falls Church. I wanted to ask, I know we've talked a lot about the Lee Highway plans to upzone that area. What other plans are sort of off in the horizon? East Falls Church itself wouldn't be surprising, but I guess I'd like to know what other studies might be in their infancy or something like that.
Well, the other potential study is the missing middle housing study itself, which is a county-wide study, but which the proponents of the Plan Lee Highway process have said will include missing middle housing as well. So both of those will potentially impact density in your area, which is known in the Lee Highway planning process as area number 1. Then you've got, Daniel, you've got potentially basically the area that radiates out from the East Falls Church Metro Station, because the county has in the past and is increasingly under pressure to increase density around the stations themselves using sort of an expanding radius around the station. So from time to time that's happened. So you're being impacted by multiple studies, the Lee Highway Corridor, the missing middle study as a whole, and the continuing effort to increase density around the radii of metro stations where they exist.
You mentioned that the county board is being pressured. Do you mean by nonprofits? I guess I'd be curious to hear specifically what pressure.
The county is being pressured by developers who make a lot of money out of being able to build more buildings where they can't build them now, build them higher, build them wider. And that pressure is incessant and ongoing. And in the view of our group, being given too great deference compared to the concerns of residents who originally moved into an area that was configured in a particular way, zoned in a particular way. Sometimes we've heard a criticism of our group saying that we want to put up a moat around Arlington and we don't want anything to change. And that is the farthest thing from the truth. First of all, those 60,000 people that the county is planning on coming here are coming under existing zoning, and they're coming, there's no moat that can keep them out. And certainly our group is not angling to build one. what we're angling to do and what we're urging people that they should have are these impact studies, so that we can get a handle on whether our county government is planning adequately for that group of people. And we want to see that before they start enabling all this additional density.
All right, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much, Daniel. John Weistat?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Peter. So Peter, my question is a John Weistat, Terra Lehigh Heights. My question is really a segue from one of your earlier slides, Peter, where you indicated that Arlingtonians for Our Sustainable Future is advocating for cost benefit studies. So your column, Peter's Take, over the last 4 or 5 years has been rather prolific on this topic. And you have pointed out a number of times that the county board way back in 2017, when I was on the board at my urging and the urging of my colleagues, we directed the county manager to come up with a series of protocols as to how the county could actually look in a holistic fashion at the pluses and minuses, the costs and benefits of many different types of housing developments. And yet since that time, almost 5 years ago now, we have not really seen anything concrete, despite comments by the county manager a few months ago that the county was actually looking to do some cost benefit analysis. And I'm just wondering if you might give any updates to the group as to where you see the county right now with at least a little lip service in that direction.
Well, that's just a very excellent question. There are really two things that the county has been dragging its feet on for a long time. And John has referred to one of them, which is an effort that John led when he was on the county board to try to get the county to begin to do these cost benefit studies of development projects. They made a promise in 2017, 2018 that they would try to do it. And here we're sitting today in the summer of 2021 and the promise is unfulfilled. They claim that they're in negotiations with a consulting firm that is known to have the capability of doing the kinds of studies that ASF would like to see. And we know they have that capability because in all of our neighboring jurisdictions, our neighboring jurisdictions do these studies with respect to major development projects, and the fiscal and environmental impacts are prepared before the projects are green lighted as part of the proffer systems that those studies envision as a way to negotiate with developers. And so the end result of that is that those jurisdictions get cash and in-kind contributions before any study is approved that are designed to ameliorate impacts on schools and some perhaps more distant park impacts, which Arlington does not. We have a different system, but even under our system, the county manager promised the board, as John said, to engage consultants who would do some kind of a study that might be of the kind that we're seeking. We've asked repeatedly for the county to tell us what the status of those negotiations is, and we've offered to participate. We began to ask that 6 months ago. We've never gotten a straight answer as to whether what exactly the scope of that study is or when it might bear fruit. And in the meantime, while Arlington has been dragging its feet in this way, development density project after project has been green lighted without getting those impact studies done. And the benefits that Arlington has derived are meager by comparison to the range of benefits that all of our neighboring jurisdictions get. Another aspect of the concern is that in 2015, even before the item that John mentioned, there was a group called the Community Facilities Study Group. And that group recommended in 2015 that Arlington develop a master public facilities plan on a long-range basis going out 10, 15, 20 years, where it was going to locate all of the schools and fire stations. And it was going to estimate what additional stormwater and freshwater infrastructure were needed for the 65,000 people that are coming here. And 6 years after that recommendation was issued, the county has failed to act on it. And during that 6-year period, all of these development projects have been ongoing, and potential sites for new schools and for new fire stations and for other kinds of public facilities have now moved into the private sector, and they're no longer available to the public sector for the kinds of public facilities that we would have had. So the result is that the county in every one of these respects has been dragging its feet to prepare the kinds of studies that we are demanding, even with respect to existing zoning. This is one of the reasons we believe that the county is simply paying too much deference to the requests and needs of developers who would much prefer to move faster and more quickly and enable themselves to get more money at the expense of a community understanding of what these impacts might be, which might alter the scope, size, magnitude of the impacts of these projects and enable the community to decide on a more reasonable, sensible pace of development and growth.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Okay, Carl is back up again as the next in line.
Thank you. Well, other than the question of how we get term limits on the board members already, has anybody explored the fact that this appears to me to be a very ageist movement and against disabled people too? If I'm in another presentation where somebody tells me that my 75-year-old wife who's had 2 joints replaced, we should give up our car and start walking more, I might be likely to get a little bit nasty would be a kind word. There is such, they brush aside everything, and they're assuming every older person who owns a single family house wants to downsize and move into affordable housing, which is would probably cost more than our crummy little single family house is worth. So, and I see the comment about elections. How? Who's running, and how do we support them? Maybe we can run into Mr. Weisstadt. Would you run as our independent candidate? You're one of only 2 Republicans. I think you were registered as a Republican once. You might be one of 2 only registered Republicans I've voted for in my entire adult life.
Well, hey, thanks, Carl. I've actually left the Republican Party.
Good for you.
Given the events of the last 5 years or so, but we'll see what the future holds. There actually are 3 independents running for the county board in the November general election. Audrey Clement, Mike Cantwell, and Adam Theo. I don't know if there may be more, but that you will have some choice, some degree of choice in November. If you don't mind, Bill, can I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Peter, other jurisdictions have been cited. They've been held up as paragons of housing virtue by those articulating in favor of missing middle. People are citing California, Portland, Oregon, Minneapolis, other localities who have, over the last several years, adopted missing middle ordinances of varying degrees. So my question is there any data yet that might be studied or extrapolated that might help inform Arlington's path going forward? Or is the initiative everywhere else too new, too fresh to know?
Certainly, that's a great question, John. Certainly in terms of the kind of extensive, reliable data that one would want to see before taking a radical step like the kind and scope of upzoning that some of the proposals we've heard about for Arlington envision? The answer is certainly no. These jurisdictions to which John referred simply haven't had these policies in effect long enough to be able to tell what the impact is going to be. And it certainly would be reasonable as a community if we said to ourselves, well, we got 2 or 3 jurisdictions out there who are trying this. Why don't we let them try it for 3 or 4 years before we, who haven't done this yet, plunge into it so we can see if it's really working for them. What we do have, we don't have that extensive data, but we do have academics who have studied the experience of some of these markets so far. Professor Storper is one that we've cited on our website. We've got an academic here in Arlington, John Huntley, who's done a study that we've posted on our website and that I referred to earlier in my presentation. And those studies demonstrate that in the kind of a market like Arlington, at least, the likelihood that we're going to get this cornucopia of affordability that is being promised by the proponents is basically zero. We're not going to get it. In terms of other speakers, we've recently been speaking with a member of the Planning Commission in Minneapolis who's described to us what was the messages that were used to sell Minneapolis on the idea of upzoning has exposed both the hypocrisy and the lack of logic in what those messages are, and believes firmly that the experiment is simply not going to succeed. And that's one of the reasons that we've demanded that the Arlington County government and the Alliance for Housing Solutions be very specific about what their objective really is with respect to this study. They started out saying it was going to be a housing affordability. They've now abandoned that, and they're talking about increasing the representation of housing types as if that was supposed to be such a wonderful goal. And we really don't see what all this fuss is about, except that it's going to be very lucrative for the developers who can cash in on it.
Okay, Charlie Clark, you have your hand up. Are you still trying to ask a question? Okay, so I think we're next to Kathy's iPhone again.
Hi, Kathy. You want to unmute?
Unmute yourself.
Kathy, you want to unmute?
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. You know, I just wanted to make another comment. I was talking to my sister today, and she's like, I don't understand how the county has so much time to do this when they haven't been able to give us the services this year in any normal way. You know, so it's like, why concentrate on this when let's get the county back open and normalized and, you know, get the schools back and help these kids who have suffered this year. It's like there's so many important things that could be done to catch up, as opposed to race forward with something that's so controversial. That's my point. Thank you.
So
tough luck.
It's a wonderful observation, and it's one that we share. The basic services that the county government is supposed to be providing us were indeed severely interrupted by COVID. But those basic services are our libraries, our schools, our police department, our water mains, and our basic infrastructure as a priority, our core infrastructure. And you've just described many respects in which these things are not operating at their optimal level. And yet we see this effort that you mentioned to go forward with something like this. And the only answer we can give is that the government's priorities are wrong, and that the priorities that you articulated are right. And why would a government do that? Who's benefiting from their misguided priorities? Well, the people who are benefiting are the builders, the developers, the nonprofit housing industry, potentially, but not the people who directly benefit from a public help from Arlington to live here if they can't afford it, because there are other ways that we as a community can decide how to help them.
Right.
And so we think this is misguided, and we urge you and everyone else on this call to make the views known that you just shared with us, and to make them known to your county board representatives, and ask them the question that you asked. Why are you proceeding on this path when we've got all these other problems to solve?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, so Corey Amron, and then after that is Audrey Clement.
Hi, my name's Kurt Ritter. I'm in Lion Village. The county has had in place for some time some programs to increase what they call affordable housing or subsidized housing, and I have been unable to find any kind of cost benefit analysis on that program that's been in place for a while. For example, what are the demographics of the people who are taking advantage of it? Well, how much, what has been the impact on the county budget and so forth? Is there any study that shows that kind of utilization and effectiveness for a program that's already in place?
Well, the answer to your question is that there are some studies, there are some partial data, but there's no really good cost benefit analysis comparing the results with other potential ways to deliver the same kinds of services, which I implicitly assumed you wish you had available so that you could look at them. The county board and the county government, excuse me, is in the middle of a 5-year review of its affordable housing master plan right now. The Housing Commission in Arlington is holding a hearing on that subject this coming Monday night. But by the metrics that Arlington chose for measuring whether its affordable housing programs are a success, it has been a dismal failure. It has only produced approximately 33% of the affordable housing units compared to the goal that it had. And that is an indication that if that was the right goal, which is questionable given the failure to examine other ways to deliver affordable housing, but if it were the right goal, it's been a failure. And in terms of how much money the county is spending on affordable housing, there are not very good studies on this, but the answer that I've seen in some budget documents is approximately 5% of Arlington's operating budget is being spent. They acknowledge that 5% is being spent on affordable housing or on subsidizing people to live here who cannot afford the market rate. But that may not at all be a completely accurate measurement of what you asked for.
Thank you.
Okay, so for our last question, Audrey Clement.
Yes, so this is going to Peter's comment that there's not enough actual data out there to evaluate the effects of missing middle on other jurisdictions. Well, I want to inform you that Suzanne Sundberg just recently sent to us an academic paper that was published by New York University, the title of which is called Zoned Out, Examining the Effect of Upzoning on Neighborhood Demographic Trends. And that would be in New York City, was published in May of 2020. It's very recent. And the conclusion is, our research uses a fixed effects regression model to compare upzoned census tracts with census tracts that were not upzoned, but had a similar demographic makeup and historic trends in the period preceding the upzoning. Again, this is in Manhattan or thereabouts. We find that large upzonings are associated with a 5 to 9 percentage point increase in the share of white people, while smaller upzonings had no significant impact. Although we do not claim that displacement has taken place per se, we find that new housing units created by an upzoning became predominantly occupied by white and Asian residents, which is basically a surrogate for higher income people. Now, this is a definitive study. The only thing lacking in it is something called statistical significance because of the small number of actual upzone census tracts that they were able to trace to an actual change in New York City zoning laws. But it is a definitive study. And given that so many of these developers who are interested in Arlington are coming from New York City, I think that this study is a surrogate for what is going to happen in Arlington. So I want to make sure that, Peter, that you're aware of this study and that Arlingtonians for a Sustainable Future are aware of this study, and otherwise I'll send it to you.
Well, that would be great. We don't have everyone from our group on the call to be able to canvass them all, but we really appreciate your sending us the study or a link to the study. That would be really helpful. The conclusion about displacement and the relative impact on the racial, ethnic, and economic profile of the new residents versus the prior residents is consistent with the experience that we've had in Arlington that hasn't been labeled upzoning. The experience we've had here in Arlington, essentially, which I partially alluded to earlier, is that we've had a number of garden apartments and other facilities like that that have been raised to be replaced by, in certain cases, so-called affordable housing, which turned out to be more expensive and not ultimately occupied by as wide a range of diverse people from diverse backgrounds as the raised apartments that were replaced. But I really appreciate your calling that study to our attention, and we'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. If we can get that, Audrey, then we could put it on our website. We have at least a couple people looking for the link to that study. So if you can get it to us, then we can put it on the website where everybody else will be able to get it. Okay, so unless anybody has anything else, that's it. We really appreciate everyone attending, and thank you, and go forth and do good.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent.